Hello and welcome to week 41's Dinosaw. 7 curious, interesting, hopefully useful things I saw last week. So let's crack on. First one is FEDEX and FEDEX partnership with Reliable Robotics. And this is an automated cargo plane. So you might have heard quite a lot about what's called last mile delivery. So this is assuming a plane comes into a big cargo hub, how does it get to the places? So FEDEX have unveiled where they've been working on actually revolutionising the main part of that as well, the big cargo planes going to the big national hubs. So this is an automated plane. You press a button, it takes off, it flies around, and it lands automatically at an airport. So this is not a special automated airport, it's just a standard airport, and it knows how to land. So basically where they're going with this is, instead of having huge cargo planes, big central hubs and distribution from there, is like, why don't you actually send smaller, more efficient planes to the local hubs and go from there as well. So this is a Cessna 280, I think it's called a Caravan. They've already done it with smaller passenger planes as well. I think this Cessna 172, if you're interested in the Skyhawk, if you're into your planes. So there you go. So watch that space. This is certainly where FedEx think the future is, but they think it's about 10 years away before anything really happens. Amazon One's Palm Reader. So this is currently, it's been unveiled and actually helps you get into Amazon stores. But the idea is really interesting. Is like, well, why read palms? So it's not reading your fingerprints. It hasn't got the definition of that. But your palms are unique to you. But interestingly, unlike face scanning, you have to have a gesture to make it see your palms. You have to hold out your hand and hold it over the scanner. So, face scanners, you have to, well, you can't help it. You have probably already been scanned if you walked into an area. So in terms of privacy, you have more control over when or where you get scanned, essentially. And secondly, also, it's contactless as well. So it's great for stadiums, mass areas, those sorts of things. So curious and interesting use. You might see more of it soon. We can now print legs on microelectronics, which is super handy. So before, if you were making nano bugs and microbots, whatever you want to call them, then essentially you had to build them out of essentially scaling up molecules and those sorts of things. It was all a bit tricky, but apparently we're really good at making microelectronics and printing circuit boards. So that same technique can now be used to actually make essentially origami legs. There's a great video that accompanies this, but essentially what you do is you create something, you etch it away, and it leaves kind of foldable things that when you energize them, they unfold. So what you're seeing here, if you look closely on the next time around, you can see some little lights flashing. So a little laser is being shone on a solar receptor. The solar receptor is causing some energy to happen near the legs, and the legs then unfold. So you're seeing front and back legs being pulsed, and therefore the robot can move. So the idea here, so you can see the lights here. So the idea here is you inject these into the human body and it goes and searches for cancers and all those sorts of things. And also you can use it to inject into plants and crops and those sorts of things to kill bugs. So interesting. So I don't know whether it's super creepy or essentially or amazing, but we can now create millions and millions and millions of micro robots as cheaply as we can circuit boards. Super creepy if this goes wrong, but also brilliant if it goes right. So these are a new set of essentially plastic eating enzymes. So these were discovered in Tokyo or in Japan a couple of years ago. One was on a rubbish tip and I think another one was on a compost heap or something like that. And they were found to be eating their way through plastic bottles. So what scientists in America and Britain have done is they've joined these enzymes together to make super enzymes. It turns out, they thought it was going to make it slower and more cumbersome, but actually it turned out it was 6 times faster. And if you then heat them up as well, they go even faster. And it turns out you can sort of eat a bottle in a day type of fast. So this could be the answer to a bunch of stuff. Now, you might also say, well, we're already recycling plastic, so what's the big deal with using enzymes to recycle plastic? We already do it. Well, what we actually do when we recycle plastic is we munch up the bottles into pellets and then we remelt the pellets into new bottles. Every time you do that, the plastic itself, the PET plastic, gets a little bit weaker. So you have to keep adding brand new plastic just to keep it strong. You can probably recycle a piece of plastic 10 times before it becomes useless, but then you can kind of turn it into something else, like a kind of, I don't know, matting or something like that isn't quite structurally as important. However, what this enzyme does is it breaks down the plastic into its raw chemicals. So it's essentially its raw elements, its compounds. So you can then use those raw elements to then make plastic again, rather than just kind of reboil the same plastic. So it's really interesting. This could revolutionize things like clothing, which is a huge polluter because they contain quite a lot of plastics as well. This really was born off seeing this billboard on the right hand side. So on the very far bottom right, you see this sort of Star Trek looking thing, and everybody's going, how is this working? It's a 3D billboard, it's the future, it's just like Back to the Future 2, which you can see in the top left. So I just thought, well, I've seen this a bunch before, but it was really interesting the fact that on certain parts of Twitter, I got this from probably about 3 or 4 people from different industries as well, and just normal people. And it was on Reddit, it was all sorts of places. So there's clearly something going on where you see this sort of billboard and it blows people's minds. It was on TikTok as well. Just to explain what's going on here, it is a curved square billboard, and as long as you stand in exactly the right place, the effect has been rendered in 3D originally so that it looks perfect from that place where you're standing. If you walk around the corner, it looks all weird and distorted. However, it looks like it's 3D, and they've even rendered on the Star Trek looking one, they've even rendered what looks like a bit like a building, so it looks like it's going over the building. So it's got very clever. The one that you can actually see in, it's actually in Seoul, on the bottom left is a big installation. It's basically an art installation called The Wave. And as this is not new, obviously you've seen it a little bit in Back to the Future, which you can see there, but also in the top right, just to remind you that this is not particularly new, and this goes back hundreds of years probably, in that this was actually 2012, I think this was a German artist who was projecting these from inside the building to look like a giant spider. So the point of this one is it went nuts on social. So if you want to get your extra bang for your buck out of your out of home, then you need to also consider your social media strategy as well, is pretty much where it is. Joe Biden is owning Animal Crossing. So actually had these, as you can see in the main image, had this sort of garden plaques that you could actually put outside your house and on your island in Animal Crossing. But he's actually just also released some hoodies and some campaign wear, so you can get those for free. So what was interesting about this is the Trump campaign has not really looked at this at all. Obviously, they're sort of sneering at this, but you've got quite a lot of very engaged and younger audiences in Animal Crossing, plus also very big celebrities. It's also a big talking point at the moment. It's almost like Snapchat used to be, or TikTok at the moment. If you mention it, you already start getting people's interest. There have been some other political campaigns going on, I guess. So the pro-democracy groups in Hong Kong, for instance, had demonstrations within Animal Crossing as well, as did PETA as well, because obviously they have an issue with catching fish and animals and for gaming purposes, that sort of thing. So you might see more of this in the future, or you will see more of this in the future. A lot of people are saying, well, this is the whole point of this, is it's fantasy and not real life, so please don't bring real life into the game, but you will see more of this. And then finally, we have my new latest interesting thing, which is triboelectric nanogenerators, or TENGS as they're called. So TENGS use static electricity. So if you've got 2 balloons and you rub them, you move them together, sometimes you might get a spark, but that attraction and repulsion is all to do with electrical charges. So what this does, and there are plenty of videos out there, if you do type in triboelectric nanogenerators, as you do, you will find people with these funny little movement detector. They put things like little bouncy balls in plastic eggs with foil in them, and they can rattle them and it will generate electricity. So this one is using 2 strips of essentially plastic, and if you blow a breeze between them, they flap together, they create static charge. And those static charges can actually, although it's not particularly strong, they can actually generate enough electricity to light an array of LEDs. And if you turn the lights out, you can see them starting to pulse. There's 100 LEDs there, I think, that it can light up. So the point of this is, it's quite interesting. The plan is, if you make these small enough, you can actually wear these on your clothing, or they can be built into your whatever you're wearing. And as you move, the wind from your limbs can generate electricity to power your wearables. But likewise, there's nothing to stop huge, paint or panels being put onto buildings. And when it's a slightly windy day, it will generate its own electricity. So you don't need these big dynamic wind windmills essentially going along, which are very difficult to put in public spaces, whereas you could just have a very big flat panel with lots of little flappy bits on it doing this and generating electricity. So we might be in this kind of weird world at the moment where we think wind turbines are the thing, but in the future it might just be flappy panels. There you go. So with that, we're done, and hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you next week.